how a market could work perfectly, because they have this wonderful word, perfect competition, which produces a perfect outcome. You know, talk about normative language when they claim that they are positive thinkers without any bias in their behaviour at all. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? I have to say I sort of got fed up with that in my first term as an undergraduate and arguing with my tutors for 3 years. But their logic is that you have perfect information. Perfect information means you know all the prices and all the information about all the resource allocation decisions you're going to make, and therefore make an optimal decision given that information. And as we realise, the whole purpose of a tax haven is to provide imperfect information. In fact, it's to make sure you've got no information at all. That was what a tax haven was there to do. It was there to obscure the truth. I think that's quite interesting again in the Quaker concept, because Quakers are the religious society of friends of the truth. They're not just the society of friends, they're the friends of the truth. And it was to deny the truth that was going on. So when we looked at this and we began to try to formulate a theory of tax havens, because there was very little, apart from one book I wrote at Plan at that time, which we could really use, and it was written from a political economy perspective, and quite interesting about the sale of sovereignty, but we needed to construct a definition of what a tax haven was. There was no definition. There still isn't, actually, I'm afraid to say. So we had to come up with something slightly different. We called them secrecy jurisdictions, because what we realised was that secrecy was the core product. In economic terms, it isn't tax that is absolutely corrosive. It's secrecy, because you can't have anything approximating to a perfect market with so much secrecy going on. And so we defined them, redefined them. It's, I guess, one of my strange achievements to redefine tax havens as secrecy jurisdictions, by which they are now largely referred in the academic literature on this subject, of which there's a growing population these days. This is actually the best-selling book on academic tax havens. I have to tell you, though, it's pretty dull. I mean, I'm selling my own book really badly here, but it is pretty dull.
It's great.
Sorry?
It's great.
Okay, all right. I mean, if you're enthusiastic, if you want to lighter people, you read Nick Shaxton's Treasure Islands, because Nick Shaxton's Treasure Islands is actually based upon the thinking in here, but is a damn sight more accessibly written, if I'm honest. The amusing thing about this is, for an academic book, it's sold 35,000 copies, which is phenomenal. 25,000 copies of those are in China, where we think they've mistranslated it as a how-to-do-it manual. How do you think the Communist Party ruling elite end up so rich? All their money is in the British Virgin Islands. There are reckoned to be 400,000 Chinese-owned companies in the BVI. It is probably the biggest single user of that one tax haven of the Chinese Communist Party. So that's why it sold so well in China. But we had to define a secrecy jurisdiction, and we defined it, or I defined it, as a place which deliberately creates law for the benefit of people who don't live there, with the intention of providing secrecy so that the person who uses it can't be identified to be doing so by the country where they really are. So that's the tax haven, it says so, and that's their home state. Look, he's got state on the front, that's my other book. So in the tax haven they provide laws for somebody who lives in that place. No, it doesn't matter what the book's called. I mean, I'm just using that's one state, the tax haven, and this is the other state, okay? So there's this place creates a law for the benefit of somebody who lives in this place. But the person who lives in this place doesn't want their country to know that they're using the tax haven. So they have to create secrecy to make sure that this country can't find out that that person's doing it. The fundamental product is in fact secrecy. It's a lie, in other words. All of this is about lying. It's dishonesty. And at the core of it, there's that whole fundamental problem that what we were doing was pointing out that there was a massive deceit going on. Because in fact, nothing happens in a tax haven at all. Oh yeah, there's some people who write numbers in a ledger, but if you pay money into a bank account in St Helier in Jersey this morning, would you like to know where it is tonight? It's in London. There's no use for it in Jersey. There's $400 billion on deposit in Jersey officially. That's over $50 million a head. Man, woman, child, baby, just born, just about to die, if you add them all up, it's still 50 million, and they don't need $50 million a head. House prices in Jersey are worse than in Chelsea, but they still don't need $50 million a head. In other words, it's complete fabrication. That money is in Jersey, of course it isn't, it's here. It's a sham. Everything about these places was a sham. But what we were doing, therefore, when we started this, and it was actually perhaps quite risky thing to do in retrospect, we were saying to these big firms of accountants, these big lawyers, these big companies, you're using these places, and you know what, we don't believe you. We actually think you're lying to us about what's there and what you're doing there. When you claim there's a company there, it's a slot in a filing cabinet. When you claim there's money there, it isn't. When the City of London says that £320 billion came from Jersey, Guernsey and Isle of Man last year combined into the City of London, we say, no it didn't. Because it had to go into Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man in the first place to come on again in the afternoon to London. Where did it come from to arrive in those places if you don't ask that question? So our job when we started was to simply ask awkward questions. Where does the money come from? And at first, frankly, nobody very much listened to us. It was very difficult to get an audience for anything. John said to me last week, when we were both suffering considerable amount of pressure one day for interviews, and we were swapping journalists virtually between us to keep the schedule going. Do you remember when it used to be really hard to get somebody interested in talking to us? Wasn't it nice? Well, no, it wasn't really, because we weren't achieving, but sometimes you now think, go away. Yeah, I had a meeting for 2 hours this afternoon, and he had to do 2 interviews for me, because I couldn't cover them, because he was, literally, we sometimes had to do that. Such is the demand. The point, though, is that when we started, we couldn't get people to be interested. It was risky. And finding somebody to talk about in the press was risky. The first big company we took on was Microsoft. I did it with the Wall Street Journal in Ireland and their activities in Ireland. And you know, we did it in 2005 and made a bit of a fuss about Microsoft, who promptly decided to actually turn their company in Ireland into a secret company, so we've never been able to look at the accounts again. Almost invariably happens when we look at something, we can never do it twice, because the information disappears if by chance we can never get it once. And then we didn't get another chance to have a pop in another company in the press until 2008. That long. Why? Because we couldn't find another newspaper who was willing to take the risk. And then we discovered that Rupert Murdoch hated Google so much he'd take the risk of publishing my story about Google. And then we created the idea of how to create all the stories that now take place about differences in profits that they're reporting in the USA and in here and so on, and how much tax is missing as a result. So sometimes you have to choose your friends and hope for the best, and I had to use Rupert for a while. He got very deep pockets, and I've only got my household's well-being and the roof over our heads to actually put at risk. And I have been sued once, and I can't tell you who did it because I'm not allowed to, because I've got a gagging order on me from the gentleman in question, so that's that. He didn't charge me very much money, but I had to shut up and not write a panorama about him. So I couldn't. Prem Sicker wrote it instead. So the panorama went out anyway, but I can't even say who it's about. So, anyway, that's life. That's the sort of risk you take doing this. And we've had to find ways to get the message out there. And gradually we did. But one of the reasons why this moved into the extractive industries, which we found early on was an area where development, there's this idea of the resource curse. That when you have natural resources in your country, they actually make it much more prone to corruption. There's an enormous flow of money for that one asset, which can be captured by a political elite, which therefore fuels corruption because they will keep backhanders into tax havens. The entire government is funded by oil or gas or mineral revenues. There's no accountability, no democracy, oppressed poor people and so on. Well, the people who picked up these ideas about country by country reporting, accounting and tax justice, and they were frankly willing to give me some income to try and make this process work, as I had rather quickly abandoned the idea of making use of charging clients for my services, were Publish What You Pay, Save the Children at that stage, in particular those two, Global Witness, who want to work on the extractive industries, which was then beginning to become into the public domain. And as a result, that's why, quite literally, I was asked earlier this week, why was there a separate campaign for the extractive industries and everything else? I said, well, because they'd pay me.
What's the extractive industry?
The extractive industries is oil, gas, minerals and timber.
Thank you.
You take them out of the ground, you extract them from the ground, including trees, they've got roots. Some people argue it's fish as well, but we've never managed to succeed with that. They take them out of the sea. Natural resources extracted from the ground. Which have been associated with massive corruption. And heavily linked to tax havens. They picked up the idea and we began campaigning around the extractive industries. That's why the first industries where we're going to get transparency around payments of tax worldwide are the extractive industries, oil, gas, minerals, and now for Europe, but not for USA, timber. The USA has not gone for timber, but Europe is going for timber. Because timber is very, very corrupt, enormously corrupt. As I've seen in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where I've done some work.
Oh, cocoa and opium, they're extracted from the ground.
Sorry?
Cocoa and opium, aren't they?
Yeah, well, no, they're grown, they're crops, aren't they?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not extracted, they are actually...
I'm not a great gardener, as you probably just noticed.
Yeah, so we wouldn't include agricultural product in that, because actually that's the result of human endeavour in interaction with, if you like, the ground. Agriculture is not subject to the same degree of corruption because you need, and the difference is you need very few people to do extractive industries. Remarkably few people can get vast amounts of oil and gas and stuff out of the ground without much effort. It's really very few jobs are created.
Do you include water?
We haven't, because it's not actually internationally transported. It might be one day, because water shortage is clearly going to be an issue, but it's never been considered an issue at the moment. Though quite clearly there's a big issue with regard to water. Not least in this country, but all over the place, yes. But it's never been an issue for corruption so far. It will be, because water shortage is clearly a massive issue for this century's agenda. But it hasn't been.
Can I just pick up on that point, actually? It's interesting that water's not covered, because of course, for example, in Yemen, for example, at the moment, water's a terrible problem. So it looks like it's actually, it's the sort of, it's the northern countries focused rather than the poor world focused perception of extractive industries.
I mean, water has never. I mean, the point about the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative was not actually extractive industries; it was corruption resulting from. And water has not been a source of major corruption. It's a major source of shortage and a local issue with regard to that, but it's not been a source of international corruption, whereas the extractive industries have. So yeah, but you may well be right. I mean, there is always that risk that we look at this from a developed country perspective. And I'm well aware of that. Obviously I have that risk. I'm a white male who lives in Norfolk. I'm not living in many of the countries that I would work with and for. I actually have worked on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I've never been there. But I've actually worked with a lot of partners from here on how to solve problems there. They've been there, but I've actually done the technical stuff. But we wanted to create a situation where this tax was paid, and to do that we had to actually begin a campaign around tax havens and the interaction between my profession, chartered accountancy, the accounting profession, the legal profession, and the bankers, who together we call the pinstripe mafia. Well, they are!
Sorry. Just having a giggle. It's fine.
I gave this talk, something like this on Monday night, when I'd actually been in the House of Commons in the afternoon, so I was actually wearing a grey suit and proper tie and silk tie and everything. I said, just imagine the face of corruption. I said, it's me. Here I am. Male, white, grey hair, grey suit, silk tie. This is the face of corruption. Because these people are the corruption providers, as we call them, which goes down really well with them. They love that.